They say an old woman's eyes are like fading embers, dimming, losing their heat, and eventually easy to ignore. It is a convenient lie that the young tell themselves so they can misbehave in our presence. They believe that because we move slower, we think slower. They mistake our silence for absence and our patience for senility. But the truth is, when you have lived 60 years in a world that wasn't built for you, you don't just see, you study. You don't just listen, you decipher. I have spent decades mastering the art of being the most dangerous person in a room simply because no one suspects I am even in the game. It was my 62nd birthday. A quiet Tuesday. The humidity in Georgia was already thick enough to chew by 10 in the morning, clinging to the hydrangeas in my garden like a damp wool blanket. I was sitting on my porch, nursing a cup of tea that was exactly 3 degrees cooler than I liked it when a delivery driver pulled up the gravel driveway. He left a small, gold-foiled box on the wicker table. No note, just a logo from a chocolatier in the city that charges more for a dozen truffles than most people spend on a week's groceries. I knew who sent them before I even saw the return address. My daughter-in-law, Simone. Simone is a woman who treats kindness like a tactical maneuver. She is a high-level corporate strategist, a woman of sharp angles and expensive silk blazers, who married my son, David, 3 years ago. Since the day they met, she has looked at my modest brick ranch and my collection of heirloom quilts as if they were symptoms of a disease she needed to cure. She doesn't raise her voice. She doesn't use insults. Instead, she uses concern. She suggests downsizing. She mentions assisted living communities with vibrant social calendars, as if she's recommending a spa. I brought the box inside and set it on the granite countertop of my kitchen, a kitchen David had paid to renovate against my wishes, under Simone's guidance. The gold foil shimmered under the recessed lighting. It was beautiful. It was expensive. And it was a mistake. You see, Simone is very thorough. She knows my medical history. She knows about my blood pressure. She knows about the strict, low-sodium, sugar-free diet my doctor put me on after a scare last autumn. She was in the room when the specialist told us that even a small indulgence could trigger a cascade of complications. And yet, here was a box of dark chocolate sea salt truffles. I didn't open them. I didn't smell them. I simply sat at my kitchen table and watched the box. Most people would see a gift. I saw a probe. She was testing the perimeter. If I ate them and got sick, I was incapable of self-care. If I didn't eat them, I was ungrateful and difficult. It was a classic pincer move. She wanted me out of this house. She wanted the equity tied up in this land to fund the mountain retreat she's been eyeing in North Carolina. She thinks I am a hurdle. She thinks I am a relic. But Simone has forgotten one very important thing. I spent 35 years as a head clerk for the county's probate court. I have seen every way a person can try to steal from their kin. I have watched the greedy trip over their own shadows for a generation. I know how to move paper, and I know how to move people. I picked up the phone and called my accountant, not the one Simone recommended, the one who sends her quarterly reports on my spending. I called a man I've known since we were both in Sunday school, a man who knows how to keep a secret, as well as he knows how to balance a ledger. I have a delivery for you, I told him, my voice as smooth as river stone. A thank you for all the extra work you've been doing lately. I'm sending a courier over with some very rich chocolates. As I hung up, I looked at the gold box one last time. Simone thinks she's playing a game of speed. She wants me gone by the end of the year. She doesn't realize that I am playing a game of endurance. Every move she makes provides me with a new piece of data, a new opening, a new thread to pull. She sent these chocolates expecting me to falter. Instead, they are about to become the first line in a very different kind of ledger. The trap was set, but not the one she intended. The question isn't whether I will survive her kindness. The question is whether she has any idea how much she has already lost by sending that box. The afternoon sun began to shift, casting long, thin shadows across the kitchen floor. It's funny how a gift can feel so heavy when you know the weight of the hand that gave it. I walked to the window and watched the mail carrier pass by. I had all the time in the world. Simone, on the other hand, was already running out of hers. She thinks the story ends with me in a room with a vibrant social calendar. She has no idea the story is only just beginning, and the ending has already been written in a language she hasn't bothered to learn. The courier arrived 10 minutes early. As I handed him the gold-foiled box, I felt a lightness I hadn't known in years. Simone thinks she's feeding a hungry old woman. She doesn't realize she's just handed me the receipt for her own undoing. Some people play for the win. I play for the lesson. And the first lesson is this: never offer a gift to a woman who has spent 60 years learning how to return them. The ledger is open, and the ink is still wet. If you've ever been underestimated by someone who thought they were smarter than you, sit a spell and join the family by subscribing to Old School Payback. Like this video if you believe the best revenge is a dish served with perfect composure. And share this with someone who knows that silence isn't weakness, it's strategy. Tell me in the comments, what's the most thoughtful insult you've ever received? I'll be watching. We're just getting started. The beauty of a well-placed gift is that it creates an obligation. In Simone's world, that obligation was meant to be my gratitude or my demise. In my world, that obligation belonged to my accountant. When the truffles arrived at his office, he didn't just see a box of candy. He saw a signal. We have a shorthand. He and I developed over decades of watching the town's elite crumble under the weight of their own indiscretions. An hour after the delivery, my phone buzzed. It was a private line, the one I don't share with David or his wife. "The chocolates are exquisite," he said, his voice a low gravel. "But I think the nutritional facts on the back of the box are incomplete. There's a lot of hidden sugar here, more than a woman in your position should be handling." "I agree," I replied, smoothing the lace runner on my dining table. "That's why I'm looking into a new diet, one that's much leaner. I want to look at the family trust again, particularly the clauses regarding incapacity and property management that were added last spring. I have a feeling there's some fat that needs to be trimmed." There was a long silence on the other end. I could hear the rustle of paper, the sound of a man who knows exactly where the bodies are buried because he's the one who balanced the funeral costs. "I'll have the documents ready for a wellness check by Thursday," he said. "Shall I send them to the house?" "No," I said firmly. "I'll come to you. I need some fresh air. It's a bit stifling in this house lately. It feels like the walls are trying to give me advice." After I hung up, I walked to the hallway mirror. I don't look like a woman who is dismantling a multi-million-dollar inheritance. I look like a woman who spends her Sundays at the AME church and her Mondays clipping coupons. I wore my pearls, the real ones my mother gave me, not the modern set Simone bought me that look like plastic pebbles. I straightened my posture. The phone rang again. This time, it was the house line. The caller ID flashed. Simone. I let it ring 3 times. On the 4th, I picked up. "Hello, Simone. I was just thinking about you." "Mother." Her voice was bright, a polished copper tone that sounded expensive and entirely hollow. "Happy birthday again. I hope you're having a relaxing day. Did the delivery arrive?" "It did," I said, keeping my tone light, airy, and just a little bit vague. "A very interesting choice. Dark chocolate and sea salt. It's quite a bold flavor for someone my age, don't you think?" "Oh, I just thought you deserved something decadent," she said. I could hear the clicking of her keyboard in the background. She was multitasking. She didn't even think I was worth her full attention. You've been so stressed lately with the house repairs. I told David we should just take it off your hands, let you enjoy your golden years without worrying about a leaking roof or property taxes. The roof isn't leaking, dear. It was just a loose shingle. I fixed it myself with a ladder and a hammer last week. The typing stopped. A beat of silence. You were on a ladder? At 60? Mother, that's exactly what I'm talking about. It's dangerous. You aren't as agile as you used to be. What if you'd fallen? No one would have known for days. I have excellent neighbors, I said, and I have a very loud voice when I need to use it, but I appreciate the concern. It's so consistent. Well, enjoy the chocolates. Eat them all. You only turn 62 once. I intend to make the most of every bite. I told her. After we hung up, I sat in the silence of my living room. She was moving faster than I anticipated. The concern was escalating into a narrative of frailty. She wasn't just waiting for me to fail. She was actively narrating my decline to David. My son is a good man, but he is a man who likes a quiet life. If Simone tells him the sky is falling enough times, he'll start buying an umbrella without ever looking out the window. I spent the rest of the afternoon in my garden, not weeding, observing. I watched the way the ants worked. They don't attack a predator head-on. They find the entry points. They carry away the resources bit by bit until the structure is hollow. I thought about the family trust. It was set up by my late husband, a man who believed in legacy. It was designed to protect me, and then to provide for David. But Simone had convinced David to let her modernize the language. She'd inserted herself as a co-trustee, a move she'd framed as a way to lighten my load. She thinks she's the ant, and I am the structure. She's wrong. By the time the sun dipped below the tree line, I had a list. Not a grocery list, but a list of vulnerabilities. Simone's firm was currently bidding on a city contract, a contract that required a clean ethical record and community stability. She was a woman who lived by her reputation. I looked at the empty space on my porch where the gold box had sat. Simone had sent me poison wrapped in gold. It was only fair that I sent her back some truth wrapped in silence. Thursday couldn't come fast enough. I had an appointment with a ledger, and for the first time in years, I wasn't looking for a balance. I was looking for a leak. Thursday arrived with a sky the color of a bruised plum. I took my time getting ready, choosing a suit of deep navy and a hat that sat with a certain architectural authority. When I walked into my accountant's office, the air smelled of old parchment and expensive toner, the scent of controlled information. He didn't offer me coffee. He offered me a seat and a thick manila folder. I've been digging, as you asked, he said, leaning back. Your daughter-in-law is clever, but she has a common flaw. She assumes that digital footprints are the only ones that matter. She forgets that some of us still keep the carbon copies. I opened the folder. My eyes moved over the lines of figures with the practiced ease of a woman who once managed a quart's worth of secrets. There it was, a series of small, incremental transfers from the family's secondary investment account, the one David rarely checks, into a private LLC. The LLC was registered to a name I didn't recognize, but the address was a P.O. box in North Carolina, near the mountains. She's been siphoning the property tax reserves, he whispered. Not enough to trigger an audit, but enough to build a very comfortable nest egg. She's betting on your incapacity to cover the gap before anyone notices the funds are missing. She isn't just waiting for me to leave. I murmured. The paper felt cool under my fingertips. She's already spent the house. It was a calculated move. If I were moved into a facility, the house would be sold. The missing tax money would be swallowed up in the closing costs and the general chaos of a forced transition. She would walk away with her mountain retreat, and David would be told it was all necessary expenses for my care. I felt a spark of something sharp in my chest, but I didn't let it reach my face. Anger is a luxury for the young and the foolish. For me, there was only the strategy. I need a certified copy of these transfers, I said, and I need the original signatures on the authorization forms. He slid a second envelope across the desk. She used a digital signature for most, but for the last one, the bank required a physical one. It's a very good imitation of yours, but the Y doesn't quite have your flourish. Forgery, a heavy word, a quiet, dangerous word. I thanked him and walked out into the humid afternoon. As I drove home, I passed the construction site where Simone's firm was supposedly rejuvenating the historic district. Large banners with her face on them fluttered in the breeze. She looked so confident, so sure of her own trajectory. When I reached my house, I saw a silver SUV in the driveway. Simone. She was standing in my garden looking at my prize-winning roses as if they were weeds. When she saw my car, she plastered on that high-gloss smile that never quite reaches her eyes. Mother, I was just stopping by. I tried calling, but you weren't answering your cell. I left it at home, I said, stepping out of the car with a deliberate, slow grace. I find that the more I talk on that thing, the less I actually hear. You look formal, she noted, her eyes scanning my suit, looking for a crack in the armor. Did you have a meeting? Just checking in on some old friends. I said, and how are you, Simone? How is the city contract coming along? I saw your banners on the way in. You look very influential. She preened just for a second. It's going well. We're in the final vetting stage. It's all about showing unimpeachable character right now. The city council is very traditional. They like stability. Stability is a rare thing these days, I replied, walking past her toward the porch. Most people don't realize how quickly a foundation can shift until they're standing in the basement. Is that a metaphor? She asked, her voice dropping an octave, the concern returning. You've been saying very strange things lately. David and I were talking, maybe we should have a professional come by, just for a chat, to make sure your memory and your perceptions are where they should be. She was moving to the final stage, the psychological evaluation. She wanted to document me as unreliable before I could speak the truth. I stopped at the top of the stairs and looked down at her. I didn't scowl. I didn't point a finger. I simply looked at her with the weight of 60 years of observation. Perception is a funny thing, Simone. For instance, I perceive that you are standing on my property, questioning my mind, while wearing a brooch that costs more than the property taxes you think I haven't paid. The color drained from her face, leaving it the shade of curdled cream. For the first time, the polished copper voice cracked. I don't know what you're talking about. I think you do, I said softly. But don't worry. I'm not going to tell David. Not yet. I think we should have a private dinner first. Just us. We have so much to discuss regarding mountain air. I walked inside and closed the door. I didn't lock it. I didn't need to. The silence I left behind was heavier than any bolt. Through the window, I watched her stand in the garden for a long time. She didn't look at the roses. She looked at the house as if she were seeing it for the first time, not as a prize, but as a cage. The air in the house changed after I closed that door. It felt stiller, heavier, like the moment before a summer storm breaks over the marsh. I didn't go to the window to watch Simone drive away. I didn't need to hear the crunch of gravel to know she was fleeing. Instead, I went to the kitchen and put on a kettle. A woman who is losing her mind doesn't make a perfect pot of Earl Grey, and I wanted every motion to be an anchor in reality. The phone didn't ring for 3 hours. That was the first sign of her fear. Normally, Simone would have called David within minutes, spinning a web about my confusion and hostility. But she couldn't. Not now. To tell David I was acting strange, would require explaining why I mentioned property taxes and North Carolina. I had handed her a mirror, and she was terrified of what was reflecting back. When the phone finally did chime, it wasn't a call. It was a text from David. "Hey Ma, Simone said you seemed a bit tired today. Everything okay? Thinking of coming by Sunday." I smiled at the screen. Tired. Such a soft, dismissive word. It was the best she could do without exposing herself. "I'm wonderful, son," I typed back, just finishing a very enlightening book on family legacies. "See you Sunday. Tell Simone I'm looking forward to our dinner." I didn't wait for a reply. I went to my desk, the heavy oak one that belonged to my grandfather, and began to organize. Strategy is 10% action and 90% preparation. I took the documents from my accountant and placed them into 3 separate, identical envelopes. One for my lawyer, one for a safe deposit box Simone didn't know existed, and one for the unforeseen. A knock came at the door at dusk. It wasn't Simone. It was Mrs. Gable from down the road, carrying a plate of lemon bars. Mrs. Gable is the neighborhood's unofficial chronicler. Nothing happens on this street. No delivery, no visitor, no raised voice that she doesn't catalog. "I saw that fancy SUV earlier," she said, leaning against the doorframe. "Your daughter-in-law looked like she'd seen a ghost when she left. Barely waved at me." "She's just busy, Eloise," I said, inviting her in. "Big city contracts. Lots of moving parts. It's a lot of pressure for a young woman to keep all those plates spinning without one of them dropping." "Well, she better be careful," Eloise sked. "Those plates make a mess when they hit the floor." We sat and talked for an hour, but I wasn't just being neighborly. I was establishing a record. I told her about my upcoming dinner with Simone. I told her how much I was looking forward to helping Simone with her stress. I made sure Eloise saw me sharp, lucid, and perfectly composed. If Simone tried to claim I was deteriorating, I had a witness who would testify to the contrary over a plate of lemon bars. After Eloise left, the house returned to its quiet. I sat in my armchair, the one that faces the garden. I thought about Simone's firm. The unimpeachable character clause she'd mentioned was her Achilles heel. The city council in this town is made up of men and women I've known for 40 years. They value loyalty. They value the old ways. If even a whisper of financial irregularity or elder exploitation reached their ears, that contract would vanish like mist in the sun. But I didn't want to just take her contract. I wanted her to realize that she had never been the predator. She had been a guest in a house she didn't understand. I pulled out a piece of stationery, the heavy, cream-colored kind. I wrote a single sentence in my best cursive. "The mountain air is clearest when the foundation is honest." I placed it in an envelope and addressed it to her office. I didn't mail it yet. I wanted her to spend the night wondering. I wanted her to wake up and look at David, wondering if I had spoken. I wanted her to check her bank accounts and feel the cold breath of exposure on her neck. The most intense pain isn't the blow itself. It's the certainty that the blow is coming and not knowing from which direction. I turned off the lights one by one. I walked up the stairs, my knees occasionally clicking, a reminder of my 60 years, but my mind was as quiet and lethal as a shadow. Fear has a specific scent. It's metallic, sharp, and once it gets into the upholstery of a life, it's nearly impossible to scrub out. On Friday morning, the air in my foyer smelled exactly like that when the doorbell rang. I didn't rush. I finished folding a basket of warm laundry, smoothing the creases of my grandson's t-shirts, before I finally opened the door. Simone was standing there. She wasn't wearing the silk blazer or the designer heels today. She was in a tracksuit, her hair pulled back in a tight, severe ponytail that made her eyes look strained. She looked like a woman who hadn't slept, a woman who had spent the night recalculating numbers that refused to add up. "I didn't think you'd be up," she said, her voice missing its usual resonance. "The sun and I have an agreement," I said, stepping back to let her in. "I rise, and it provides the light. Would you like some tea, Simone? I find it helps when the mind is racing." She walked into my kitchen and sat at the table. She didn't look at the granite countertops she'd insisted on. She looked at her hands. "David told me about your text, about the Family Legacies book. Mother, let's stop the games. What do you want?" I poured the water, the steam rising in a slow, hypnotic swirl. "Want? I want my birthday to be a day of peace. Simone, I want my son to be happy, and I want the property taxes on this house to be paid with the money my husband worked 40 years to set aside." She flinched as if I'd slapped her. It was a loan, a temporary bridge. My firm was facing a cash flow squeeze before the city contract finalized. I was going to put it back. Every cent. With interest. "A loan usually involves the consent of the lender," I said, setting a porcelain cup in front of her. It clinked against the table with a finality that made her jump. "You didn't ask. You forged. You gambled with my security to buy a view of the Blue Ridge Mountains. That isn't a bridge, Simone. That's a betrayal." "I can fix it," she hissed, leaning forward. "If you tell David, it destroys everything. His career is tied to my firm's reputation. If I go down, he loses his standing too. Do you want that for your son? To see him humiliated because you wanted to prove a point?" She was good. She was trying to use my love for David as a shield for her own greed. It's a common tactic for people who believe that family is a weakness to be exploited rather than a bond to be honored. "David is a man of character," I said softly. "He will be hurt, yes, but he will survive. You, however, are worried about the city council. You're worried that if a certain concerned citizen were to send an anonymous tip to the ethics committee regarding a co-trustee's unauthorized use of funds, your unimpeachable character would become a liability." The silence that followed was heavy. I watched her realize that I wasn't just holding a grudge. I was holding her entire future in a manila envelope. "What are your terms?" she whispered. "Terms?" I chuckled, a dry, papery sound. "I'm not a negotiator, Simone. I'm a mother. I want you to go home. I want you to spend the weekend thinking about the difference between an asset and a human being. And on Monday, you will bring me a certified cashier's check for the full amount missing from the trust. Not from the LLC, from your personal accounts." "That's nearly $60,000, she gasped. "I don't have that kind of liquid cash sitting around." "Then I suggest you start selling things," I said, standing up. "Perhaps that brooch, or the mountain property, because on Tuesday morning, if the check isn't on this table, the envelopes go out. One to the bank, one to the city council, and the last one to David." I walked her to the door. She moved like a sleepwalker. As she reached her SUV, she turned back, a flicker of the old defiance in her eyes. "You think you've won, but David will hate you for destroying our lives." "No, Simone," I said, leaning against the doorframe. "David will be heartbroken, but eventually he will realize that I didn't destroy his life. I simply cleared the rot so he could build something that won't collapse. Now, drive carefully. The roads are slick after the rain." I watched her pull away. I knew she wouldn't go to David yet. She would spend the next 48 hours trying to find another way out, another lie to tell. She didn't understand that the more she struggled, the tighter the knot became. I went back inside and picked up the phone. It was time to call the one person Simone had completely overlooked. Her own assistant, a young woman I'd been accidentally befriending for months over shared recipes and stories of old-school wisdom. The phone rang exactly twice before a soft, hurried voice answered. "Hello, Mrs. Patterson." Hello, Maya, I said, my voice warming like honey in the sun. I was just sitting here looking at that recipe for the blackberry cobbler you sent me. I noticed a small detail. You used a pinch of cornstarch where my grandmother used flour. It's a clever adjustment. It keeps the fruit from getting too heavy. Oh, thank you. Maya sounded relieved, her voice shedding the tension of a long day at the firm. I find that if you don't control the moisture, the whole thing just falls apart. Exactly, I murmured. Control is everything. Tell me, how are things at the office? I imagine with the city contract coming to a vote on Tuesday, everyone is working late. Maya sighed, a sound of pure exhaustion. It's a madhouse. She's on edge. She had me pulling the audit logs for the development fund this afternoon. She seemed panicked, searching for something from last spring. I've never seen her so disorganized. I leaned back in my armchair, watching the shadows of the willow tree dance across the floor. Audit logs. That sounds like a heavy burden for a Friday evening. Did she find what she was looking for? I don't think so, Maya whispered, her voice dropping. She kept asking if there were any offline backups. She was worried about the manual signatures we scanned in. I told her everything is synced to the cloud, but she just stared at the screen like it was a ghost. The cloud is a very public place for a ghost to hide. I said, Maya, you're a bright girl. You've been very kind to an old woman these last few months. I'd hate to see a talented young strategist like you get caught in a storm you didn't create. If things get complicated on Tuesday, remember that the ethics committee values transparency above all else. There was a long, sharp intake of breath on the other end. Maya wasn't just an assistant. She was an observer, much like me. She had seen the sharp corners of Simone's ambition for years. She knew where the moisture was hiding in the cobbler. What are you saying, Mrs. Patterson? I'm saying that sometimes the best way to save a building is to step out of it before the demolition starts. Keep your own logs, Maya. Keep them safe. And if anyone asks you about the property tax transfers from the family trust, tell the truth. Integrity is the only currency that doesn't devalue. When I hung up, I felt a strange sense of calm. I wasn't just fighting for my house anymore. I was teaching a lesson in physics. For every action, there is an equal and opposite reaction. Simone had spent years building a world of glass and mirrors, believing she was the only one who could see through them. She didn't realize that I had been sitting in the dark, watching the reflections. Saturday passed in a blur of quiet domesticity. I baked. I gardened. I spoke to David on the phone for 20 minutes. He sounded distracted, mentioning that Simone was under the weather and staying in bed with a migraine. He apologized for missing our Sunday dinner, saying they needed the weekend to prep for the big Monday presentation. Take all the time you need, son, I told him. Some things can't be rushed. Just remember that I love you and I only want what's solid beneath your feet. I know, Ma, you're the best. I put the phone down and looked at the clock. The countdown had begun. Simone was currently in a darkened room, trying to figure out how to move $60,000 without David seeing the withdrawal. She was looking for a way to delete the digital ghosts that Maya was now watching with newfound clarity. She was exhausted. I, however, was well rested. I spent the evening in my study, composing a final letter. This one wasn't for Simone, and it wasn't for the city council. It was a letter of instruction for my accountant, to be opened only if I wasn't the one to make the call on Wednesday morning. In this world, people think the elderly are finished because we have more past than future. They don't realize that a long past gives you a very long reach. I wasn't just protecting my home. I was curating the end of a legacy of greed. The storm was moving in from the coast, the wind beginning to rattle the window panes. I welcomed it. A good rain washes away the dust, and by Tuesday morning, the air would be perfectly clear. Sunday morning arrived with the kind of stillness that feels like a held breath. The storm from the night before had moved on, leaving the world scrubbed clean and smelling of wet cedar and ozone. I dressed for service, a quiet gray silk with a modest silver brooch, and drove to church. I sat in my usual pew, the one where the sunlight hits the mahogany at exactly 10:15, and I prayed, not for vengeance, but for the strength to be as precise as a surgeon's blade. After the service, I didn't go home immediately. I stopped by the cemetery. I stood by my husband's headstone, a simple granite marker that had weathered 30 winters. "She's trying to sell the view, Arthur," I whispered to the grass. "She thinks your sweat and your Sundays were just a down payment on a mountain house she hasn't earned." I felt no anger then, only a cold, crystalline resolve. When I returned home, the silver SUV was already in my driveway. Simone was sitting inside, her forehead resting against the steering wheel. She didn't look like a high-powered strategist anymore. She looked like a gambler who had realized the house always wins, especially when the house is owned by a woman who knows the floorboards. She stepped out as I approached. Her face was gaunt, the makeup from the day before smudged into the fine lines around her eyes. She held a white envelope in her hand, as if it were a live coal. "I have it," she said, her voice a dry rasp. "40,000 from my personal savings and 20,000 I had to borrow against my jewelry and some stocks. It's all there. A certified check." I took the envelope, but I didn't open it. I didn't need to. The weight of her defeat was heavy enough to verify the amount. "And the LLC, Simone, the one in North Carolina, I'm dissolving it," she spat, a spark of the old venom flickering in her eyes. "The deposit on the land is forfeited. I've lost everything I spent 2 years building. Are you satisfied? You've effectively crippled our financial future." "No, Simone," I said, my voice as steady as a heartbeat. "I've restored my son's inheritance. Your financial future was built on a foundation of theft. You didn't lose what you built. You lost what you stole. There is a profound difference." She let out a harsh, jagged laugh. "You think you're so righteous, but you're just a bitter old woman who can't stand to see someone else in control. David will find out eventually. He'll see what you did to me today. He might," I agreed, tucking the envelope into my Bible. "And when he does, we will look at the bank statements together. We will look at the forged signatures together, and we will see who was really in control. Now, I believe you have a presentation tomorrow morning. I suggest you go home and practice your speech. Unimpeachable character is a very difficult thing to fake when your hands are shaking." She turned without another word and drove away, kicking up gravel like a physical insult. I watched her go, but I didn't go inside. I knew the move she would make next. A woman like Simone doesn't surrender. She pivots. She would spend the night trying to find a way to frame the loan as a misunderstanding, or perhaps she would try to discredit my accountant. But I had already made a move she hadn't anticipated. I picked up the phone and called my son. "David, I know you're busy with the city contract, but I need you to do me a small favor. I found some old documents of your father's, some original deeds, and trust papers from 40 years ago. I'd like you to come over tomorrow afternoon, after your meeting, to help me file them properly. It's time we made sure the legacy is secure." "Sure, Ma," he said, sounding tired but affectionate. "I'll come by around 4. Simone will probably be celebrating by then anyway. We're expecting a landslide victory on the contract." "A landslide is a very appropriate word. Son," I said, "I'll see you at 4. I spent the evening in my kitchen, not with tea, but with a glass of cool water. I placed the check on the table and sat across from it. It was just a piece of paper, but it represented the return of my peace. However, the payback wasn't just about the money. It was about the revelation. tomorrow at the city council meeting, Maya would be sitting in the second row. She would have her laptop open, and she would have the audit logs ready, not to attack, but to answer questions. And the questions would come. I had made sure of that with a very quiet, very anonymous phone call to the head of the ethics committee, a woman I had served with on the library board for 25 years. The trap wasn't just set, it was closing, and Simone was about to walk into the brightest light of her life. The morning of the council meeting was unervingly bright. I spent it in my garden, deadheading the roses. There is a specific kind of peace that comes when you stop fighting the inevitable and simply let the gears of a machine you've built begin to turn. At exactly 10 o'clock, the city council convened downtown. I didn't attend. A woman of my position doesn't need to be in the room to make her presence felt. I had already woven my intent into the very fabric of the day. Around noon, my phone remained silent. That was the first sign. If the contract had been awarded, David would have called me jubilant. If the presentation had gone smoothly, Simone would have sent a curt, victorious text. The silence was the sound of a landslide, quiet at first, then absolute. At 3:40, a car pulled into my driveway. It wasn't the silver SUV. It was David's old truck. He stepped out, and even from the porch, I could see the slumped weight of his shoulders. He looked like a man who had been caught in a sudden, freezing rain. He walked up the steps and sat in the wicker chair beside me, staring out at the hydrangeas. "It's over, Ma," he said, his voice hollow. "The contract, the firm, everything. What happened, son?" I asked, my voice as steady as a heartbeat. An anonymous tip led the ethics committee to pull the trust audit logs during the final Q&A. They found the siphoned funds. They found the LLC in North Carolina. When they asked Simone to explain the temporary bridge from your accounts, she couldn't. She looked at Maya, expecting her to hide the files, but Maya just handed them over to the board. He put his head in his hands. "She forged your name, Ma, on the tax reserves. She told me the house was being taken care of. I believed her because I wanted to believe her. I thought I was protecting you by letting her manage the details." "You were being a good husband, David," I said, placing a hand on his arm. "But you forgot that some people use a marriage as a mask. She didn't just steal from me. She stole your peace of mind. She gambled your reputation on a house with a view she hadn't earned. She's at the office now, packing," he whispered. "The council is blacklisting the firm. There will be an investigation." She kept screaming that it was all your fault, that you tricked her into paying the money back. But the check, the cashier's check I found on the kitchen table this morning, it was already too late. The audit was already live. I didn't tell him that the timing was intentional. If she had paid the money back a month ago, the audit might have passed. But by waiting until the 11th hour, by waiting until I forced her hand, she had left a digital trail of panic that no strategist could erase. The return of the funds looked like a confession, not a correction. "I have the money, David," I said softly. "It's back in the trust. Every cent. The house is secure. Your inheritance is intact. And more importantly, the truth is out in the light where it can't fester anymore." He looked at me, then really looked at me with a mixture of grief and a newfound, startled respect. You knew she'd fold if you pushed the right button. I've spent 60 years watching people think they can outrun their own shadows. I said, Simone thought I was a hurdle to be jumped. She didn't realize I was the ground she was running on. You can't jump over the earth, son. It's always there, waiting for you to land. David stayed for dinner. We didn't talk about the firm or the mountain house. We talked about his father. We talked about the garden. We talked about the future. A leaner, quieter future, but one built on solid ground. As the sun began to set, casting long, golden fingers across the porch, I watched a single firefly blink in the tall grass. Simone was gone from this house, and soon she would be gone from David's life. She had arrived with a box of chocolates and a plan to dim my light. She left with nothing but the weight of her own choices. Payback isn't about shouting from the rooftops. It isn't about fire or fury. True payback is the quiet click of a door locking behind someone who never deserved to be inside. It is the restoration of order. It is the moment when the person who thought they were the hunter realizes they were only ever a guest in a home that knows how to defend itself. I am 62 years old. My knees ache when it rains, and my eyes aren't what they used to be, but my mind is a ledger that always balances. And tonight, for the first time in a long time, the books are perfectly clean. If you've enjoyed this journey into the quiet power of a woman who knows her worth, make sure you are subscribed to Old School Payback. Like this video to honor the strength of those who move in silence, and share it with someone who needs to remember that patience is the ultimate strategy. Tell me in the comments, have you ever had to clear the rot to find the foundation? I read every word. Until next time, keep your eyes open and your circle tight.